There is a scandal involving Governor Cuomo. I know, you're shocked, right? This one is of the COVID variety. There's the two different categories. There's the awful COVID stuff and then the awful everything else about who he is as a person stuff. Well, we're gonna focus on the COVID stuff because now, in addition to all of the stories involving the numbers of people who died in nursing homes and that being covered up and all of that, we also have this. As the coronavirus pandemic swept through New York early last year, Governor Andrew Cuomo's administration arranged for his family members and other well-connected figures to have special access to state-administered coronavirus tests, dispatching a top state doctor and other state health officials directly to their homes, according to 3 different people. Among those who benefited were the governor's brother, the CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, and his family, who were tested several times in the pandemic's early phase. The governor's mother and at least one of his sisters were also able to take advantage of the state administered tests. And bear in mind, this was when you could not easily get tested. It's relatively easy now. It was not in the beginning, particularly in New York, considering how many people either had it or feared that they might. And we now know that a state lab immediately processed the results of those who got tested in this particular way, even as others might have to wait a long time to get their results. At times, employees in the state health laboratory were kept past their shifts until late into the night to process results of those close to Cuomo. The specimens were shrouded in secrecy, marked only by initials or numbers, and then results were then provided to the family member. So, as in a lot of his other scandals, it is clear based on that not only was he doing this, but he wanted to hide it as much as possible, which is why they hid the identity until the results were sent back. It seems like this is the last thing that Cuomo needs, considering everything that's been happening this last month.
Yeah, and more so than the allegation itself, which obviously sucks and is horrible, but I think it's an indication that the knives are out for this guy. It's no holds barred now. Like these guys, everybody is unloading and dumping on him. They could see the writing on the wall that he's toast, and they have no because. Obviously, people knew about this as it was happening, but the reason why it's coming out now is because everybody sees that, all right, it's a safe space to go in on this fool. And because look, to be honest, nobody's surprised by the idea that people close to the governor got preferential treatment around stuff like testing, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's honestly, I think most reasonable Americans would be like, I would expect that Cuomo took care of his family members and hooked them up via his position of power. That's going to happen. But what I will say is that I would pray. Not that I pray because I'm atheist, but I'm just saying I would hope, John, that the media would do a better job of framing the Cuomo quote unquote scandal and lead with what he did with them nursing homes. Because that cost people's lives. People died because of that. All of the stuff with the sexual harassment and all of that stuff, those allegations, that's serious too. But that's not really in his capacity as governor of the state of New York, right? Like, yes, take him to court, do all the things, prosecute him for all of that. Yes, we want to see it. But when it comes to impeachment and why this guy needs to be taken out of office, he did not do his job. He did not execute his job as governor when it comes to the nursing home scandal. And he had the nerve to write a book about coronavirus handling. Like he took a victory lap for how he handled the coronavirus. Like this dude was doing a book tour because of his handling of the coronavirus. So that's what I would hope these outlets would lead with. It's about this guy was derelict in his duties, in his job as governor of the state of New York. And as a native New Yorker who now lives in LA, and I have family members, of course, and my closest friends that I grew up with still live in New York City. This is something that I feel very passionately about. Like this dude, he failed them miserably and horribly, and then he got on TV and read some damn notes, and everybody did a clap their hands and stomp their feet and called themselves homosexuals for it. It's embarrassing. So I'm glad that the scorn is raining down on his head finally.
Yeah, I think that point you made, that this story could have come out 6 months ago, but it's coming out now. Someone in that chain, a doctor, one of the administrators, feels free to talk about this now. And I agree, like in comparison to the nursing home scandal, it doesn't seem that important, but in terms of buttressing the narrative that what did he care about and what did he not care about during the pandemic? Well, he cared about protecting his family. He cared about protecting their reputation. They didn't want bad information to get out. In terms of actually protecting people's lives, and much more of a mixed record. So anyway, that's not gonna help him. I did wanna give them a chance to respond. So a spokesman for Cuomo said, we should avoid insincere efforts to rewrite the past. In the early days of this pandemic, when there was a heavy emphasis on contact tracing, we were absolutely going above and beyond to get people tested, including in some instances going to people's homes and door to door. No, I'm not reading any more of that. That is not what we are talking about. It's not, oh my God, he tested people. It's kind of the specific people he was testing that is the problem. So you had your chance, Rich. We're done with you. Now on Chris Cuomo, CNN put out a statement saying, it is not surprising that in the earliest days of a once in a century global pandemic, when Chris was showing symptoms and was concerned about possible spread, he turned to anyone he could for advice and assistance, as any human being would. Come on, stop. Both of these statements are like, well, you're right. Now that you bring it up, they are great people. That's not what we're talking about. Those are not our concerns. And by the way, I like to admit potential bias even when there's no bias there. Chris Cuomo is one of like the only hosts on mainstream media that has had people from TYT on. I myself was on once right before the pandemic. That said, I don't like this. I get it, as Waz was saying. I get why the governor would do it. I get why Chris Cuomo, who had COVID, would want to be tested. I get that. But I also believe that corruption is a bad thing, even if I might kind of like the people doing some of the corruption a little bit.
No, and again, this is, if he's getting his family and close friends or whatever, some type of preferential skipping the line. I really do think reasonable people, especially as CNN so cynically outlined, like this was an unprecedented global happening. People were doing crazy things at the time. Sure, cooler heads can prevail, and we can understand that. Probably 9 out of 10 people in the position of both Cuomo brothers would have done the exact same thing, right, for their family members and looking out for family. Like, we get it, and in the context of tens of millions of people who live in New York City, I don't think a few of Cuomo's sycophants and cronies, getting a test before them had a major impact in people receiving their tests. Like we can contextualize it and understand that. But when you put it within the context of Cuomo's governorship and his penchant for utter corruption, like this isn't an isolated incident. I think if it was isolated, you wouldn't see it put in this context of the sexual harassment, the way he handled COVID, his bullying ways in Albany. If it was just by itself, you'd be like, who cares? This isn't even a story. Sure. But it's of a piece, right? Of something larger and more grand, and tells a bigger story about, quite frankly, a freaking horrible dude. He sucks. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, it's like DeSantis having one of those vaccination sites set up in like a wealthy donor's neighborhood is both by itself worse than what Cuomo did. But even that, if that was the only, if DeSantis had been like totally pro science the whole time and then had done that, it would have been bad. But it's in the context of he was awful the whole time in every way he could. And annoying.
Before we move on, another thing that Cuomo did that I don't think people think about in context of this enough is, in the middle of the pandemic, this pro-corporate shill in Albany cut Medicaid funding.
Yeah.
In the middle of the pandemic. This man has never ever done anything to make the corporate or financial interests in New York State sweat for a second. But Medicaid is provided. Basically, the threshold is you have to be either unemployed or make it something like 17 or 20 G's a year to qualify for it. So it's our most vulnerable citizens in New York State relying on that healthcare, and he cut it during the pandemic. This is the type of cat we're talking about here. Just disgusting, disgusting.
Jeez. Yeah, and like if you're gonna cut all these people's healthcare, at least send them like a signed copy of your book about how awesome you are at the coronavirus as like, a consolation prize or something. I love the idea of like he hits the ball and like he celebrates as he's passing second, like he's done. Like, no, dude, there's so much more pandemic still.
To be done.
Even in New York, there's so much more pandemic.
Right.
Anyway.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.